Geography Unit 1, Video 2, Maps. Throughout our study of geography, we will look at a variety of different kinds of maps. This video is just meant to familiarize you with some of the maps that you will be encountering in the next few weeks. The first map to start with are choropleth maps. Choropleth maps are those that the map uses a different coloring, shading, or symbol to denote something. It uses divisions to represent the change, like the state or the county. Each spatial unit, like a state or a county, is filled with a uniform color or pattern. These maps show one type of data and usually a graded color series to show least intensity to most intensity, lightest to darkest. So as we go through these, you will want to jot down the examples of these maps. Don't try to redraw the maps, however, just jot down the examples of the map. The first map we're going to look at is the population density of the state of Minnesota. This map was produced by the Rand McNally Corporation. And this map is a choropleth map because it does show that each spatial unit, that's the county, here's Olmsted County down here, is filled with a uniform color or pattern. It shows one type of data, which is population density, and it is a graded color series. So the more intense, that means the more dense the population is, the darker the color. As you can see in the metropolitan counties of Minneapolis-St. Paul, the population is more dense, that is, there's more people per square mile. Whereas in some areas in the northern parts of Minnesota, the population is less dense. So this is one example of a choropleth map. So you might want to jot down in your notes the population density of Minnesota. Another example is mobile broadband subscriptions. So this map was created by GeoCurrents using data from the Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Report of 2013. This map shows mobile broadband subscriptions per 100 people from 2011 or later. As you can see, the colors that have blue is the most intense, and the darkest blue is heavily concentrated in parts of Western Europe, the United States, and Australia. The least amount of mobile broadband subscriptions, therefore internet subscriptions, is in dark red, as indicated in most of Africa, parts of Central America, and southern India. So this is also a choropleth map, even though there are two different colors represented. This very simple map showing victims of lynchings from 1882 to 1968 was produced by the Tuskegee University National Center for Bioethics, and it shows very simple color gradients, the lightest to the darkest, indicating the number of lynchings that were reported in that time period. As you can see from indicating on the map, the darker the color represents more lynchings that occurred during that period of time. Choropleth maps are just one example of the types of maps. Another type of map is the dot distribution map. The dot distribution map uses a dot or another symbol to show the presence of something or display some kind of pattern. The size of the dots can be scaled in proportion to the intensity of the variable. For example, number of McDonald's in the United States, as shown on the map here on the left. This map indicates the contiguous United States visualized by distance to the nearest McDonald's. It was produced in September of 2009, and as you can see, east of the Mississippi, there is a heavy concentration of McDonald's, whereas west of the Mississippi, there are fewer McDonald's available, except for in major metropolitan areas, such as the Denver area, and also the Las Vegas area is over here, down here as well. So this is an example of a dot distribution map because there are dots distributed on the map that show a heavy concentration in some areas and a light concentration in others. Another example of a dot distribution map is this map that shows one dot per 100,000 people. In Asia, so this is China, India, and then Malaysia, and in Southeast Asia down here, these dots indicate, each dot indicates 100,000 people. As you can see, there is a heavy concentration of people along the coastal regions, and in Japan specifically, there's heavy concentration there. And then this is South Korea, showing a lighter population density here in North Korea. So this map distributes dots based on population. So those are two examples. Don't forget to jot one of those examples down in your note of a dot distribution map. Another type of map is a graduated symbol map. so the symbols are graduated, therefore there's size involved. A cartographer, that's a person who makes maps, alters the size of the symbol to correlate with the data values. There's a variety of ways that they do this, and you'd learn about that in a college class. However, the graduated symbol map is a map with symbols that change in size according to the value of the attribute they represent. For example, denser populations might be represented by larger dots, or larger rivers by thicker lines. Don't forget to jot down some of these examples, so let's go through a few. The map here shows oil consumption around the world. Each circle states the country, the number of barrels per day of oil, and the change in percentage from 2008 to 2009. The countries represented here represent all the oil-consuming countries in the world. Not every country consumes oil in the world. And the size of the dot is directly correlated with the amount of oil that country consumes. For example, the United States is the largest, consuming 18,686 barrels a day, whereas Mexico consumes only 1,945 per day. So this map shows a variety of different things. It shows not only the total amount, but it also shows the change over a period of years, and it also gives you a good idea of how much the United States uses in correlation with a country like China, who has over 1 billion people in it, as well as India, but the United States has only approximately 300 million. So there is a vast difference between the variety of countries around the world and their consumption of oil. As you can see, the entire world consumes 84,000 barrels of oil. The United States consumes 18,000 of those barrels. If you do the math on that, that's right around 20% of all oil consumption in 2009 was consumed by the United States. Here's another example of a graduated symbol map. The larger the shopping cart, the more Walmarts there are in the area. So each state is represented with a shopping cart showing the number of Walmarts that the state has. We can see up here there's some states that have very few Walmarts, probably because of their size, but also out here in the western part of the United States, these areas are sparsely populated, therefore Walmart is likely not to occupy the territory. Texas seems to be the state that has the most number of Walmarts. However, this map does have somewhat of a discrepancy because after 100, we're not told what 500, 1,000 represent, etc. As we can see, Texas is the largest, but we don't know how many Texas actually has. But that's another example of a graduated symbol map. Finally, a cartogram. They're perhaps the most interesting to look at. A cartogram is another type of thematic map. These are all thematic maps, mapping a certain variable, such as travel time, population, or income, and it's substituted for land area or distance. That might not make much sense, but let's take a look at the examples. So, if we look at this first one, this shows the world of 7 billion. If we divide up the entire world with 7 billion people, the land area is shown, the size of the land area directly correlates with the number of people in that country in reference to the 7 billion total. As we can see, India, which really isn't that large, India is approximately the size of Texas, and China, which is of course a large country, represents the biggest portion of this cartogram map. Whereas the United States, and specifically Canada, if we look at Canada, how many people live in Canada versus its land area size in reference to France. Canada is much bigger than France. However, Canada has much fewer people than France in this world map of representing 7 billion people. Therefore, Canada is small on this cartogram, and France is much bigger. We will go through several examples of these in class, and you will have your own opportunity to make a cartogram in class. Another example of a cartogram can be a grid cartogram. The grid cartogram is, instead of just the odd shapes, it's somewhat easier to create. You can create it on graph paper, and then you can divide the squares on the graph paper by the total number. So this map shows the percentage of adults with AIDS in 2008. As you can see from overall on the map, Sub-Saharan Africa has 22.4 million cases, and so therefore Sub-Saharan Africa represents a much larger portion of land area than actually represented on a normal map, because this map showing the correlation between the size of the land area and the variable measured here, which is the percentage of adults with AIDS in 2008. As you can see, the Caribbean, which is a very small area, now represents a much larger area of the map because 0.24% of all AIDS cases are located in the Caribbean. So those are examples of cartogram maps. There are other examples of other types of maps. We will run into a few of those. The one I want you to be most aware of is probably a contour map. You've likely seen a contour map if you've ever been on a hike. This contour map does show an area with a very high mountain. And so as the terrain gets steeper, the lines get closer together. As the terrain gets more flat, the lines get further apart. So that's a very simple example of a contour map. Throughout the quarter, you will encounter these 4 different types of maps that we've gone through specifically, and you will encounter some other types of maps.